everybody. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's the 12th of June. I keep thinking it's July. It's the 12th of June, 2024, and I'm really glad you're here. It's kind of an interesting news day. Again, a day where there are things to get outraged about and things that maybe we shouldn't be outraged about, but we'll talk about that in a moment. I'm really glad you guys are here. As always, I am coming to you from occupied Tongva territory here in Southern California. As you all know, or I think almost everybody knows, there is a potential relocation in my future. So we shall see how much longer I will be here, but you guys will know that as soon as there is something to announce. I also, as always, want to shout out to our visually challenged viewers. Today, I am wearing a white sleeveless turtleneck sweater. My hair is pulled back. I have my thick gold hoops in. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty blonde-haired woman, and I'm in front of my plant and my lamp and my big chair. And I am excited to be here, as always. All right. So the big news this morning, and I want to just clarify what this news is, because there was someone on our Patreon feed this morning who got very, very agitated about this breaking news. Saying that it was about Trump getting special treatment. And I want to make it really clear that that is not what has happened with this story, but the story itself is fairly earth-shattering. So here's what we know. As I mentioned to all of you on Monday, we're really not supposed to know anything at all about what happened in Trump's probation interview on Monday morning. Because all of that is confidential and it's really only supposed to go to the judge. However, some city official, and we don't know who, has leaked some information about what happened in that meeting to the press. And apparently in that interview, Trump admitted that while he had turned in 2 guns that he had owned that he had in New York at the time that he was indicted on the 34 counts of which he has now been found guilty, he did not turn in a 3rd gun that was apparently at some point transported to Mar-a-Lago, for which he also had a permit in New York. Now, of course, now that he's a convicted felon, he's not allowed to own a gun. And one of the things that that means is that he was supposed to have turned this gun in at the absolute latest when he was convicted, okay? There's an argument to be made that he should have turned it in when he was indicted. So here's the problem with this, though, because, again, I want to remind everybody that, once again, like, we have to be really thoughtful about how we interpret current events. Okay. Someone on the Patreon feed this morning was like, he is being allowed to do this. This is yet another example of special treatment. And how come he hasn't been arrested and blah, 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 blah. Okay. So let me just, and I don't mean to dismiss this point, but I want to make it really clear that there's a lot of reasons to allege or claim that Trump has received special treatment. This is not one of them. And let me just explain why. Nobody apparently knew that he had this 3rd gun. Okay. It's not like, apparently at the time that he turned in the other 2, he said the other one was at Mar-a-Lago. We don't even know whether the details of this are legitimate yet or not, but it doesn't appear that the criminal justice system in New York City was aware that there was a 3rd gun hanging out there anywhere. And did not have any reason or knowledge to act on it. All right. Now, this is a violation of his conditions of release. It's also, by the way, a violation of his release conditions on other standing indictments like Fulton County. So what we know this morning is that the NYPD has now been informed that there is this 3rd gun, and they are referring that to the Palm Beach Police Department to take appropriate action, meaning like, get the gun from Mar-a-Lago. I personally have kind of concerns as to whether or not there will be any action taken by the Palm Beach police. This is Florida and it's Trump's territory. And I'm really not sure that we're going to see action in Florida to take away Trump's gun, notwithstanding his conviction. But I do also just want to point out here that should a prosecutor in New York or in Fulton County or in DC, because Jack Smith could do this too, or for that matter, in the Southern District of Florida in front of Judge Cannon, make a motion to have his release revoked because he's indicted and carrying a gun, and that's a violation of his release conditions, then a judge would have to act. All right. But I do want to point out that this is something that apparently was not known to the powers that be until Monday. And so I don't want anybody running around saying that there's special treatment, because there's nothing that can be done about this unless people know it's happening, right? Which is literally now like 36 hours ago at this point. So it is not as though the fact that he admitted this in his probation interview would result in him being indicted by a grand jury in this tiny window of time. All right. Again, I have to remind everyone that there is no way in which these things work the way that they work in television legal dramas. And I also just want to point out that, even in a situation where it was your average citizen, if that person possessed a gun in another state and that information never came to light until that person's probation interview after a conviction, it's highly unlikely that that person would be subject to immediate arrest. All right. So again, I want people to just be mindful that action is being taken now, that there is an awareness of it. Now, what the Palm Beach PD does with it next is anybody's guess, but it is a violation of, again, his release conditions. So, please be thoughtful about how you react to these things. But, again, it's a very dramatic moment in the context of what could happen if a prosecutor chooses to raise it, because it could result in him being just remanded to custody for the duration of the time that he's awaiting trial or awaiting sentence. And we'll have to see what happens next. Okay. I also just want people to be aware that, as always, even though this is being reported now by multiple news sources, you do have to be really careful about the anonymous sourcing of this stuff. I would not have, put this at the top of the list of things to discuss today if it hadn't been confirmed by multiple sources at this point, including the New York Police Department and the Palm Beach PD having awareness of it. But I do just want to make one thing really clear here. Okay, I tend to be more suspicious than usual when something that is deeply confidential and that is supposed to be protected allegedly leaks to the media, right? Because that in and of itself is something very dangerous to the person who has done the leaking. So it appears to have been confirmed, but I do want everybody to be very thoughtful when you see something like this, particularly if it's anonymously sourced and it's something that is historically and legally supposed to be kept confidential, to make sure that you are confident of the veracity of it before you share it. Okay. And really the question that was asked, because this is a standard question in a probation interview like this, is, do you own a firearm? Right? Do you own any guns? And that was how this came up. And maybe nobody had ever asked Trump that question before. So again, mindful that there will be things moving in the direction of this. Okay, I'm sorry. Let me just respond to this comment, because this is rather rude, actually. So your explanation about why Trump is not receiving special treatment is that Trump is Trump and this is Florida, but that's not special treatment, huh? That is exactly not what I said. That is a rampant misinterpretation, actually, of what I said. What I said was that any other citizen in this circumstance where there was information that was not known to law enforcement would be in exactly this situation. And this is information that was just disclosed to law enforcement 36 hours ago. That is too short a window for there to be an indictment. Too short a window for there, by the way, to be an arrest, because you have to seek an arrest warrant. So please understand that I'm not saying that Trump is not receiving special treatment in other ways, but in this regard, this is not something to kind of flip out about. All right. Now that the information is known, the appropriate steps within the law enforcement structure are being taken. All right. And again, I have to remind people, there are lots and lots of things to be very, very upset about right now. Okay. And as I said yesterday, and you can go back and watch this broadcast if you would care to, it's really critical that you manage how you're consuming information so you know what to be outraged about and what not to be outraged about. And I'm just going to tell you right now, the fact that in 36 hours after this interview, the probation officer has reported it to the NYPD. The NYPD has responded. The NYPD has referred it to the Palm Beach Police Department. That happening in the space of 36 hours is actually an incredibly rapid response. And again, I just have to remind people that this is why facts matter. Okay. If you don't understand the way that these things work, it's very difficult for you to evaluate whether or not you actually need to even be upset about something. All right. Now, if the Palm Beach Police Department decides to do nothing about it, then we have a reason to be upset. Okay. But we don't have a response from the Palm Beach Police Department yet about what's happening with this gun. And, frankly, the reporting about this particular issue of the Palm Beach Police Department knowing about it has only been reported this morning. Okay. So again, everybody's got to take a breath. Just take a breath. Okay. And please don't be snarky to me in the comments. We really try to do our best here to maintain a positive, helpful community here with the benefit of the doubt. All right. Everybody's asking a lot of questions about Judge Cannon's order, which, by the way, we discussed like at long length on yesterday's broadcast. So if you want to, okay, I'm going to block this person. Bye. He has responded to the deficient bond, but you're gone because you're just being rude. Okay. We don't tolerate rudeness. I'm actually just going to ding the troll bell just for rudeness today for fun. Okay. Here we go. So there's been a lot of questions about what the fallout from Judge Cannon's ruling on the motion to dismiss. And I do want people to understand that we talked at length yesterday about what that ruling actually said. But I also just want to mention very clearly that this is not without further recourse. The fact that she struck that particular paragraph, which a lot of people are very up in arms about, okay? Jack Smith could file what's called a motion for reconsideration. That is where you ask the judge to reconsider their ruling because maybe their rationale was wrong. Now, if this was your standard judge would take a motion for reconsideration and reconsider it. Do I think that Judge Cannon's actually going to do anything with that? Probably not. Now, I do want to remind everyone that we have been through quite a lot of discussion on this channel over time about the issue of how a writ of mandamus works and how Jack Smith could go to the 11th Circuit, go around Judge Cannon and see if there was a way to get her removed from the case or to otherwise force her to effectively do her job. And there's a broadcast that, that talks about this, like I think 3 months ago now. So you can go find it on the channel. All right. But one of the things that I do want people to be mindful of here is that every single time she does something like this, it's further evidence in support of a writ of mandamus. And this is a particularly strong basis for that because as we discussed yesterday, the paragraph that she struck from the indictment is one that shows Trump's culpable state of mind, that he knew he was holding classified materials, that he was showing them to people who he knew he shouldn't have been showing them to, and that there is testimony to that effect, right? Like there's actually audio tape. But that paragraph has been struck now from the indictment, which means evidence related to it will probably not be heard at a criminal trial. That is problematic. So Jack Smith, I'm sure, is considering what his recourse will be here next, whether that will be a motion for reconsideration or a writ of mandamus. We shall see. All right. But I also want to point out that this particular issue would be a foundational issue for appeal after trial. He might try to do it now, but I don't think he would be successful. Motions to dismiss are generally, any appeals related to a motion to dismiss are generally not interlocutory appeals. Those of you who have been here for a while know that that means you can kind of go up in the early stages of a case rather than waiting until the trial is over. Here, I don't think there's going to be a legitimate basis to appeal on the basis of this paragraph being struck, but it is evidence that would further support a writ of mandamus. So we'll have to see what Jack Smith decides to do next in this regard. And again, I have to remind you all, which I know is something I say quite a lot here, please keep your expectations about what is happening in this case, like literally in the basement. She is not going to do anything right. And the more that you expect her to just like mess it up, the less that you're going to be disappointed when she does it again. All right. Again, I've said over and over again, this case will not go to trial until after Joe Biden is reelected. And that will be after he is reelected, there will be no excuse to not try Donald Trump in the Southern District of Florida, like immediately. And there really isn't one now, but you get my point, right? Like we're dealing with a judge who clearly doesn't want this case to go to trial, both because she's an ideologue, but also because she is wildly incompetent. And if you have any questions about whether or not she's prepared to handle a case of this magnitude, you can just go read, the reporting about why her 2 law clerks quit inside their year-long term and refused to finish it, because there's a lot of evidence out there at this point about that. Okay, I want to respond to one comment here because there have been a lot of questions about this on the Patreon feed from time to time. I don't think Judge Cannon is being coached. Like, I just want to make this really clear. And I'm also really big, as you all know, on not spouting off things that sound like conspiracy theories when we don't have any direct evidence of it. Okay. So let me just make one thing clear here. Okay. It is entirely possible that she is both an ideologue and that she has no idea what she's doing. She was not qualified to be appointed to the bench. She was one of the people who was shoved through in the last window of the Trump administration into a seat in Florida where like it was going to be her alone in one particular area of the Southern District. And she was never qualified for this job. She doesn't know what she's doing. And so I don't think we need to be any more nefarious other than to say that, like, obviously she's got her thumb on the scales of justice for Trump, but also it may be that she's afraid to go to trial because it's going to reveal how utterly incompetent she is. It can be both at once, and it doesn't have to be anything else, right? Again, one of the things that I just want people to understand is that you've got to be thoughtful about the actual facts and evidence that we have in front of us, instead of spinning off into things that like are just not necessarily proven by what we know so far. Okay. And let me just add like kind of one other thing to this, because there have been some questions on the Patreon feed. Again, you want to ask me questions, please become a paid subscriber at patreon.com/resistance-live. You get to ask me questions for the live broadcast every day. And also I will answer them in writing, generally speaking, if I don't answer them here. So if you have questions about how any of this stuff works, you should become a subscriber at Patreon. All right. One of the questions that I was asked was whether or not Jack Smith could just like refile this all in Bedminster. Or refile it all in the District of New Jersey. So one of the things that people need to be aware of is that you cannot allege, indict people on the same set of crimes in two different jurisdictions unless there is a separate set of conduct that isn't connected, like a separate set of crimes that isn't connected between one another. Okay, so let's just, here hypothetically, we already have conduct that took place at Bedminster in play in the indictment in Florida. And that is because the nexus of the crime is in Florida. That is where he kept the documents when he was asked to return them for 18 months. That is where the documents were discovered during the FBI execution of a search warrant at Mar-a-Lago. And what we know about Bedminster is only this, that there was one instance where a document was shown to a reporter, right? That's the paragraph that's now been struck, okay? And it involved his campaign advisor. We do not have any other separate set of crimes that are not connected to this conspiracy, okay? That have a nexus in New Jersey, all right? And I do not want anybody spinning off here in the context of like Ivana's coffin. That stuff like just like makes me mental because it makes us sound like crazy people, okay? We don't have any actual evidence of any crimes separate from the conspiracy that is already being prosecuted in Florida that we know took place in New Jersey. And he can't just drop it and refile there because that's something called forum shopping or judge shopping. And when litigants do that, it is really disfavored by judges, okay? It is not something that you want to do. You don't want to like spin the wheel in one jurisdiction, go like, oh, we got a judge we didn't like, better dismiss and file it over here. That's something that actually can get you sanctioned as an attorney. All right. So there's no way to do that. And then if you're tried, you can't be tried twice in the same place for the same crime because double jeopardy applies. But that's not even what we're talking about. People are like, why doesn't he just proceed in the District of New Jersey? Because he can't. Because he can't. And also because it would very clearly make it look like a targeted prosecution. So I want people to be aware that at least for the time being, until the 11th Circuit acts or Jack Smith forces them to act, we're stuck with Judge Cannon. And for that reason, it's incredibly significant to just keep your expectations extremely low. Yes, we would know if a writ of mandamus was filed. If a writ of mandamus was filed, it would hit the docket in the 11th Circuit. We would know. Okay. All right. Did that. All right. There is some good breaking news out of New Jersey this morning, though, that everybody should be aware of, which is that one of the other things that is the case when you are a convicted felon is you're not allowed to have a liquor license. And the Attorney General of the state of New Jersey has announced this morning that they are investigating whether or not Trump will be allowed to keep the liquor licenses on the Bedminster Golf Club. Let me just say that if you're not aware of the value of liquor licenses, they are extremely significant and important to any service-based industry, let alone a golf club. So if Trump loses his liquor licenses in New Jersey, that is probably likely to be the end of a lot of business at the Bedminster Trump Club, where, of course, Trump spends like every summer. Not good for business. And the other thing I'm going to say here is that depending on various states' laws, that this could be the case in other places where he owns property as well. For instance, if there is, additional property where he's got a liquor license in other parts of the country, some of these buildings we know he's only got a brand name deal with and he doesn't actually own the retail in these spaces. But, let's just say hypothetically that at Trump Tower, Chicago, he operates a bar or a restaurant on the ground floor. He could, if Illinois law prohibits a felon from owning a liquor license, he could lose his liquor license there. So again, we're going to have to see how this all dominoes out. But it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays. For the person asking, can he just transfer the liquor license? Generally speaking, no. And one of the reasons for that is that in order to qualify for a liquor license, you have to go through an enormous background and character check. I know way more about this than I should because I know a lot of people in the restaurant business in New York City. And I know this is the other thing about it. Liquor licenses aren't cheap. Like, this is not an easy process for anyone to get a liquor license. All right. So please understand that, again, the various consequences to being a convicted felon are not just the guilty verdict. And there are other dominoes yet to fall here that may impact Trump and his businesses in other ways. I'm going to remind you all, by the way, the whole Trump empire in New York is done thanks to Letitia James. Like, the whole thing is in receivership. So again, being able to understand the way in which the consequences are going to continue to domino out from this conviction should hopefully give folks, like a little bit more understanding and help in the process of feeling a little bit better about where we are. I will say that I continue to be a little bit amazed at how quickly people have spun from thrilling overjoy at his conviction less than 10 days ago to like absolute despair and the propaganda that nothing is happening again. All right. Because the thing that and maybe this is a lack of awareness and maybe it's just like falling for the noise on social media, but I just really want people to grasp that we are only now at the beginning stages of the consequences that are going to happen to Donald Trump as a result of these convictions. Yes, it may end in incarceration, but that's not even the end of the story. All right. The gun ownership issue is a start. The issue of the liquor licenses is a start. There's other licensing requirements, like whether or not he can hold a real estate license in a given state that could potentially be implicated by this. Any licensing process that requires a certain character, like God forbid he was a lawyer because he'd be disbarred like that, right? Any licensing that requires some form of an evaluation of character or certain regulations that require you to never have been convicted of a felony to hold a license could potentially adversely impact his business. And that's not even dealing with like the actual business implications of this. So again, please continue to, hold out hope. All right. Now, let me just say one other thing here, because there have been questions on the feed, on the Patreon feed, there's been a significant uptick in these questions in the last 48 hours. And the questions go something like this. Shouldn't we just stop talking about Donald Trump? Why aren't we just focusing on all of Biden's wins? I don't want anybody talking about Trump anymore. Isn't it terrible for us that all the focus is on Donald Trump? Okay, so I have a couple of responses to this, and I hope people are open to hearing this, all right? I have to remind everyone, and again, the longtime viewers here have heard me talk about this since like way, way back. We're talking since like last December when we really started having very serious conversations about how to mobilize for the November 2024 election. The target market for anything that we are doing, from a mobilizing, activism, or even social media posting standpoint, is disaffected and disengaged voters. And I know it may be hard for people to believe in this audience, but there's an awful lot of people in the United States of America who are not paying attention to politics day in and day out. And yet, getting their votes for November is incredibly critical, like beyond critical. Turnout is where it's at. And we need overwhelming turnout in November, like overwhelming, because we need a reclaimed House, a held Senate, and a second term for Joe Biden to go in with an absolute mandate to fix what's broken. All right. The thing I want people to understand is that if you are not paying attention day in and day out to what's happening in the political realm, to the campaign, to the crazy, to everything that Donald Trump is saying on the campaign trail, even to like sharks and batteries and all the nonsense that we talked about yesterday or Monday, people need to grasp that there are people who are not watching this. And one of the things that is very noticeable, if you haven't been watching it, is that there is a dramatic difference between who Trump was in 2016 and who he is now. I'm not saying he wasn't, I said this a couple of days ago. It's not that he wasn't always like a white supremacist. It's not that he wasn't always xenophobic, but his ability to string a sentence together, to actually make legitimate sense, has declined in a dramatically observable fashion. And people need to be made aware of literally how crazy he has become. And I am in the same boat here as George Conway on this. I think that he needs to be amplified and publicly laughed at and humiliated because it triggers his narcissism and it makes him even more crazy. Rinse, repeat. I happen to think actually that we're at a stage right now where there needs to be more public conversation about his malignant narcissism and his sociopathy and his aims to be a dictator and everything that he's trying to do with Project 2025. I think there needs to be exponentially more broadcast journalism about it, because they're perfectly happy to talk about Biden being old, but they're not talking about Trump being completely crazy. And so from the standpoint of how we're looking at this election, people need to remember that if we do not make it very, very clear to disaffected and disengaged voters what's at stake and also what the consequences are to sitting out the election, we're toast. Like, we're toast. And I'm also just going to point out, you all know how I feel about polls, but I'm going to point out that there was a poll yesterday that came out that showed that something like over 50% of the people who are currently supporting Biden have defeating Trump as their number one issue. Why? Because of everything that he stands for, because he's completely insane, because he's a malignant narcissist and a sociopath, and because he wants to steal everyone's rights. And if the thing that gets Joe Biden elected is defeating Donald Trump, you can't do that without telling people why we need to defeat Donald Trump, right? Now, I want to say something else about this because I do want people to be mindful of messaging strategies. And again, those of you who've been here for a long, long time have heard me talk about the strategies proposed by Anat Shankar-Osorio, who is universally renowned to be the best progressive messaging strategist in the United States right now, okay? And her methodology is, you guys have heard this before, to start with shared values, to go to who's the villain, and then to talk about vision, okay? You cannot do effective messaging for this election if you skip the villain part. You can't just be like, our shared values are democracy. Therefore, we're going to build a great future with Joe Biden. Okay. That's too milquetoast. Okay. You have to be able to establish what's at stake. So if you do it in the form of, we have shared values in America about democracy and freedom and being able to make decisions about what you're going to do with your own body in consultation with your doctor, for instance. Here's Donald Trump. He thinks that women who have abortions should be imprisoned. He thinks that democracy should be overthrown so that he can stay president forever. Here's an example of Donald Trump talking about how he wants to be a dictator on day one and seek revenge against his political enemies. But if we elect Joe Biden, our democracy will be stable and secure for another 4 years. If we elect Joe Biden and we take back the House and we hold the Senate, we can codify Roe versus Wade into federal law so that abortion rights can never be tampered with again. We can make sure that the freedoms that we expect as Americans and the rights that we are guaranteed stay a part of American life. There you go. Okay. So please keep in mind that there is a manner in which you can do this incredibly effectively in order to make sure, that we are not missing any aspect of the critical importance of the way this messaging strategy gets people, okay? And you don't do this from a Democrat-Republican standpoint, right? That's the other thing I just want people to understand is that when you're doing this messaging strategy, you're building bridges, right? You're saying, here are the universal values that we all share. Freedom of movement, being able to cross state lines if you need healthcare, for instance, right? Donald Trump and the GOP want to take that away. But if we reelect Joe Biden and we take back the House and we hold the Senate, we can make sure that the freedom of movement to travel for any medical care that you need is guaranteed. There, I just did it again. All right. So you have to be thoughtful about the way in which setting up all three of the things is incredibly critical. Okay. You have to set up all three. All right. And I do just want to mention one other thing here. I want to remind everybody here that, one of the benefits of having done this work for 7.5 years and, hosted congressmen and Senate candidates and other people on my prior podcast and, having worked campaigns for people who have run for the House of Representatives and the Senate as an advisor, that, it is incredibly important to follow the lead of what the Biden-Harris campaign is doing. Okay. And I know people inside the DNC, and I'm kind of aware of what the strategy is right now, okay? And one of the key strategies, in addition to amplifying all the good that Biden has done, is pointing out the crazy. And why are they doing that? For exactly the same reasons that I'm talking about here. Because they know that the election will be won or lost by motivating people to get out to vote. And one of the ways that you motivate disaffected and disenchanted voters to get out to vote is by pointing out exactly what Trump is and has become, all right? So that's my 2 cents about that. All right. And I hope that it makes sense to all of you. I know people are sick of hearing about Trump, but I just have to point out, again, huge swath of the American electorate not paying attention. They probably know he's convicted by now, but that may be all that they know. They're certainly not watching MSNBC 24/7 like a lot of you are. Okay. I also just want to give you guys finally a couple of bits of good news. There was some very good news out of the South Carolina primaries last night for those who weren't paying attention. Lots of Proud Boy candidates, Oath Keeper candidates, far-right candidates defeated in the primary, and also very, very low turnout for the GOP in South Carolina. Kind of shocking. There was also a special election result that swung, the GOP candidate was reelected, but that swung by 20 points in a district that Trump won by 30 points in 2020. And again, I have to point out, one of the issues here is how money is invested in various campaigns. If more money had been invested in that campaign, we would have flipped that seat. So one thing that again, I just really critically want people to understand here is that there are a lot of harbingers right now that things are really headed in our direction. And we've got to keep doing all this work in the direction of making sure that we turn out as many people as possible in November. Again, I'm going to say it. It's going to be like my mantra every day between now and November. It's not enough this year just to vote. You've got to motivate people around you to vote. You've got to deep canvas. You got to volunteer. Okay, that's it for today. I want everybody to keep their chin up. Things are moving in a positive direction. There's lots of good signs of it. I will be back tomorrow, regular time. Please thumbs up this broadcast. Don't forget to subscribe here. Don't forget you can become a paid subscriber at patreon.com/resistancelive if you want to ask questions. And also separately from that, because there seems to be some confusion, you can also become a member here on YouTube. And that is by clicking the join button below this broadcast. That is separate from Patreon, two totally different things. But it's another way that you can support this broadcast financially and also get extra perks like emojis and, like Resistance Live logos and all sorts of other things. Okay. And behind the scenes videos are coming. So in any event, please support this broadcast if this work is valuable to you, because this is 50% of my day job these days. And meaning it's a lot of time. And especially during trial, you all know I was here twice a day, 3 or 4 times a week most days. And I will be again whenever we get to that place. So much love to all of you. Thank you all for being here. Thanks especially to our supporters. And I will see you all back here tomorrow. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great Wednesday. Much love. All right. Bye.